One of the first things that the independent African nations did was to perform an organization called the Organization of African Unity. This organization consists of all independent African states who have reached this agreement to submerge all differences and combine their efforts towards eliminating from the continent of Africa colonialism and all vestiges of oppression and exploitation being suffered by African people. So, we have formed an organization known as the Organization of Afro-American Unity, which has the same aim and objective: to fight whoever gets in our way, to bring about the complete independence of people of African descent here in the Western Hemisphere, and first here in the United States, and bring about the freedom of these people by any means necessary. That's our motto. We want freedom by any means necessary. We want justice by any means necessary. We want equality by any means necessary. That in 1964, living in a country that is supposedly based upon freedom and supposedly the leader of the free world, we don't think that we should have to sit around and wait for some segregationist congressmen and senators and a president from Texas and Washington, D.C. to make up their minds that our people are due now some degree of civil rights. No, we want it now, or we don't think anybody should have it. We, the members of the Organization of Afro-American Unity, gathered together in Harlem, New York, convinced that it is the inalienable right of all our people to control our own destiny. Conscious of the fact that freedom, equality, justice, and dignity are central objectives for the achievement of the legitimate aspirations of the people of African descent here in the Western Hemisphere, we will endeavor to build a bridge of understanding and create the basis for the Afro-American unity. Conscious of our responsibility to harness the natural and human resources of our people for their total advancement in a sphere of human endeavor. Convinced that in order to translate this determination into a dynamic force in the cause of human progress, conditions of peace and security must be established and maintained. And by conditions of peace and security, we mean we have to eliminate the barking of the police dogs. We have to eliminate the police clubs. We have to eliminate the water hoses. We have to eliminate all of these things that have become so characteristic of the American so-called dream. These have to be eliminated. Then we will be living in a condition of peace and security. We can never have peace and security as long as one black man in this country is being bitten by a police dog. No one in this country has peace and security. Dedicated to the unification of all people of African descent in this hemisphere and to the utilization of that unity to bring into being the organizational structure that will project the Black people contributions to the world. I repeat, because to me this is the most important thing you need to know. I already know it. We assert that in those areas where the government is either unable or unwilling to protect the lives and property of our people, that our people are within our rights to protest themselves by whatever means necessary. Malcolm X spoke at the founding of the Organization of Afro-American Unity to persuade African Americans to join his cause for equality and civil rights. Using an assertively demanding tone, Malcolm X successfully persuades his listeners to act for equality of African Americans by using repetition, sentence patterns, and subjective diction. Malcolm X uses repetition to help his listeners gain confidence in their actions. For example, he ends his first paragraph with, "the freedom of these people by any means necessary." Furthermore, he continues his second speech with, We want freedom by any means necessary, and we want justice by any means necessary. The repetition of the phrase forces listeners to start believing that they have the power by any means necessary. Another example of repetition is in Malcolm X's speech is in paragraph 7, where he lists the things that must be accomplished in order to have peace and security. Malcolm X uses "we have to" in a repetitious manner to emphasize the dire need of the movement. Malcolm X is successful in achieving his goal by increasing the confidence in his listeners and asserting a need for action through repetition. To continue, Malcolm X successfully persuades his listeners to act for equality by using sentence patterns. In paragraph 3, Malcolm X lists the reasons for joining the cause of the Organization of Afro-American Unity. In doing so, he creates a pattern for the clause beginnings. He separates the long sentences with phrases such as "convicted that" and "conscious of." The pattern of sentences allows for the listeners to distinguish the different reasons of why they are joining the cause. The pattern of sentences allows for Malcolm X to successfully persuade his listeners because it gives structure to the speech and emphasizes important points to joining his cause. Although some people think that objective diction persuades better, Malcolm X's usage of subjective diction was essential to persuading his listeners to join his cause. Malcolm X chose to use phrases such as "our people" instead of "the community." The connotation of "our people" allows for the listeners to understand that Malcolm X is part of their struggle, while the use of "the community" gives a distanced approach to the issue. If Malcolm X had used "the community" instead of "our people," then his listeners would not feel as inclined to join the cause because he had no credibility to fighting on their side. Furthermore, Malcolm X uses the pronoun "we" throughout his speech rather than "you." This helped Malcolm X's cause in that it was an issue that was his responsibility to help solve and not just the listeners. This allowed for the listeners to understand his involvement in the movement. Malcolm X successfully persuaded his listeners to join the cause to fight for the equality of African Americans through his usage of repetition, which instilled confidence and need for change, sentence patterns which helped and add organization and structure to his speech, and subjective diction which added a personal involvement of Malcolm X to the movement of the organization.